sons and daughters.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Aurora Smedley podcast, where I speak with you about what the world needs to hear. And the topic for today's episode is, why do dangerous things? And what you're going to find is that this podcast is not actually about doing dangerous things. This podcast is about doing what is true to you, regardless of the risk or danger. And while I'm not promoting for doing things recklessly, I do feel that having a relationship with danger is something that develops a person. And in today's society, we are so allergic to danger. We are so afraid of danger. We're so afraid of ever being at risk, of ever having any risk to our life or limb, of ever really being in a place that would compromise us even in the slightest way, that we become internally weak because we are so afraid of danger. So this episode is informed by my previous experiences of having hiked from Mexico to Canada solo on the Pacific Crest Trail. This is 2,000 or so miles of wilderness backpacking. This is also informed by hitchhiking for hundreds of miles, of driving across the country multiple times alone, of being a motorcyclist, and living abroad and moving abroad with not very much in my bank account, and basically doing a lot of things that would make most people very squeamish, which would make a lot of parents of a daughter feel extremely uncomfortable. But what I've found is that by doing these quote unquote dangerous things, it develops your own internal sense of confidence in a way that I do not believe many other things can. And so I'm going to go over a number of perspectives that I've developed about why you should do dangerous things. So let's start. The first perspective that I'd like to share about dangerous things is that, first of all, a lot of things that people perceive as being dangerous are actually not dangerous. So by doing dangerous things, you are oftentimes just breaking the perception of what danger actually is. So, for instance, I think a lot of people will think about backpacking and think that it's really dangerous. And it could be, it can be. However, on a regular basis, we're engaging with things that are often much more dangerous, such as driving a car. And yet, because we are simply accustomed to driving a car on an everyday basis, simply because this is acculturated, we do not perceive driving a car as dangerous, whereas we perceive backpacking as being extremely dangerous. And of course, there's a lot of caveats there. It depends where you're going. It depends on the weather. It depends on your gear and all of this, your experience level. But a lot of the time, people's perception of danger is actually not equivalent to the actual danger. So when you do dangerous things, you are actually breaking your perception of what danger is. You are breaking your internal fears and limitations and doubts that keep you in a former worldview that certain things are dangerous. The second perspective that I'd like to share about danger is that a lot of people's dialogue about danger is only in consideration of the physical danger and not the psychological danger of not doing the thing. What I mean by this is that the vast majority of people will just not do something simply because it's dangerous. but then disregard the fact that somebody might be inexplicably drawn to that thing. And my perspective is that when someone is inexplicably drawn to that thing, it means that their soul needs that experience in order to develop itself to its next level, because we all came here to do different things as souls. And when we refrain from doing things simply because they are dangerous, we may be limiting our personal and soul's growth from becoming the next version of ourselves that has already done the dangerous thing. Basically, what I'm saying here is that we are seeing that physical danger is the ultimate danger, while disregarding the fact that not becoming what we need to become may be an even greater danger of living a life that is out of alignment, of living a life that is not true to what we are, of living a life of half of ourselves is the true danger. So this doesn't mean to go out there and do something extremely reckless, right? But what this does mean is that, for instance, if somebody feels called to ride a motorcycle, for example, or go into the military, or pursue an artistic career, or travel abroad, the call to do that thing is something that we have, as a society, learned to disrespect. And the call of that thing is what is usually going to help shape that person into becoming a more full and embodied version of themselves. And so by avoiding danger simply to avoid it, we are preventing the highest manifestation of that individual. So the third perspective that I'd like to share regarding danger is that danger is actually not as simplistic or objective as we might think. That the actual level of danger is dependent on a lot of different things, such as equipment and skill level and ability. For instance, if someone who has never driven a car were to go rent a car and drive down the street, this would probably be extremely dangerous. Whereas someone who has been driving for many years, who has always driven with a lot of safety, is going to have a much lower risk of encountering a danger from driving. Similarly, if you are to do a bunch of psychedelics recklessly and mix it with other drugs, or do it in a way where you don't actually feel that safe in the environment, then you're very likely to have a negative experience from doing it. And that experience can have psychological repercussions longer term. But if you do research and do your due diligence and find a way to do it that feels safe and wholesome, then you're probably going to have an amazing experience. So the actual danger, the actual risk from doing any activity is not only dependent on the activity itself, but your own level of ability, your own level of risk assessment, and your own level of self-awareness and preparation. So there are other factors that come into things that determine the actual level of danger of an activity. So choosing a direction that is true to you, regardless of the danger, is what I'm endorsing here, not actually doing something that is reckless. And please, y'all, don't go about and blame me for this afterwards. You need to take responsibility for your own decisions. But what I am saying here is that if you feel called to do something that other people might consider risky, the actual level of risk is going to be determined by your own preparation and risk assessment, as well as your abilities. I've seen this, for example, on hiking trails, that the same trail can be very risky for one person and not risky for someone else because one person doesn't have adequate navigational skills, or doesn't have enough water, or doesn't have enough know-how to navigate icy terrain, whereas somebody else might have the navigation, the know-how, the skills, etc., in order to do so. The final thing that I'm going to discuss in relation to doing dangerous things is this concept of fear. Because we experience so much fear on a daily basis, even in a way that we are not even aware of. We decide not to ask this person out because we're afraid. We decide not to set a boundary because we are afraid. We decide not to do the bold thing because we are afraid. And it's okay. I think there's some amount of fear that is warranted that we should pay attention to. But on the other hand, over exaggerating our fears, allowing our fears to take the driver's seat rather than putting them in the co-pilot, to conversate with our fear rather than giving it the driver's wheel, and moving from a place of inner alignment and truth rather than from our fear and limitation. So the ultimate goal from my perspective is to move from a place of inner alignment regardless of the fear, the danger, the etc. that is going on. And we temper this, of course, with our risk assessment, our risk mitigation, reducing the amount of risk that we're actually exposing ourselves to. But then on the other hand, we need to allow ourselves to do things that are true to us, even if it feels scary. And when we do things that are genuinely scary for us, but that are aligned, there is an opening that happens in our spiritual world because we are expanding our concept of what is possible, because we are expanding what we are beyond this place of fear. Shifting this conversation a little bit, I'm going to move into how this actually impacts our own development and the development of our adolescents. Because so much of our society these days is about avoiding danger, about avoiding fear, about avoiding any kind of dangerous activities. And because of this actually raises our children, raises our adolescents to make their life decisions from a place of fear, to make their life decisions solely from a place of safety, rather than from a place of inner alignment, of inner truth, and of following our path here on earth. And this limits our young people's ability to become courageous versions of themselves, to become people that have overcome danger, who have overcome adversity, who have overcome risk, who have navigated risk skillfully and emerged from it as wiser individuals. By preventing our adolescents from experiencing any kind of danger, we are also preventing them from going through certain rites of passage, from developing competence, and from emerging as greater versions of themselves that are more internally secure in a way that we haven't seemed to be able to create in a digitally focused, danger allergic society. And that we as adults who have not experienced danger ourselves are therefore raising our children to be afraid of danger, to run from danger rather than to face it, to allow risk, danger, and fear to dictate their life decisions rather than making decisions from a place of inner truth. So, because of this, we can see that the overarching effects of avoiding danger is much more widespread, is much more overarching in its effects than simply us dealing with our own relationship with fear. That it is shaping our children and our children's children's relationship to fear or danger. I know that this has all been some interesting food for thought, and I'm very excited to hear your all's perspectives on how this is relevant for your life, what you feel is actually true for you. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think that I'm full of bullshit? I look forward to hearing your perspectives on this topic. So with that, I thank you very much for your time in listening to my work, and I look forward to seeing you next week in the upcoming episode.